Good morning. It's me again. I trust you have had a great week. This morning, I want to speak about self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, have you ever woken up from bed and you just know it was going to be a bad day? And sure enough, someone stepped on your foot, your colleague seems to be in foul mood, and negative things seems to happen. If so, you are likely experiencing a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, self-fulfilling prophecy is when a person unknowingly causes a prediction to come true due to the simple fact that he or she expects it to come true, whether it is a positive or a negative thing. In other words, an expectation about a person or an event can affect our behavior such, that our attitude towards that person or that event causes the prediction to be realized. So when we expect the negative, we obtain the negative. Now, self-fulfilling prophecy occurs more often than you think. Unfortunately, we often expect the worst. It is part of our human psychology. And in this pandemic, there's plenty of room for this psychology to work to our detriment. We begin to project the worst for our circumstance, our economies, and our future. We're hearing from all the experts, including all the armchair experts on social media, to affirm our worst fears or our negative expectations. Now, self-fulfilling prophecy actually occurs in Scripture. The book of Job, chapter 3, verse 25. Job said, "What I dreaded has happened to me." Now, Job, if you know the story, he went through a horrendous times in his life. He lost all his children, and he lost had everything destroyed in his life. He lost all his wealth and his assets and his possessions. And in the midst of all that, he lamented. In other words, he aired his inner thoughts and inner feelings. He said, "What I dreaded has happened to me." You can actually see Job's a train of thoughts, his thinking pattern in the second half of verse 5 of chapter 1. Scripture tells us in that verse that early in the morning, Job would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of his children, thinking, perhaps my children, may sin against God and curse God in their hearts. And Scripture was explicit. This was Job's regular custom. In other words, his regular habit. Job was anticipating in his mind, he was anticipating for the worst. He was anticipating, the worst of his children's behavior, as if he knew what he dreaded would come to pass. Now, the genesis of self-fulfilling prophecy sits in our human behavior of our thoughts, our sight, and our faith. Now, our thinking affects the manner in which we see things, our perspective, the way we perceive events surrounding our lives. And this seeing has incredible impact on our decision making. And this is both at the conscious level as well as at the subconscious level. What you think, what you see, that you become. Well, that's what you got. You and I can never be anything above what our thinking and our seeing allows us. Now let me share with you an Old Testament story on this principle. Genesis chapter 30, verse 29 to 39. In the interest of time, I will paraphrase the story for you. It's a story about Jacob. It's not a long passage of scripture, so you might want to read it for homework. This is an amazing story. I want to show you an incredible insight into this story. It will help change your thinking and to see things differently from here on, to change the manner you perceive life and the current events that surround you and I. But first, let me clarify that what I'm about to share with you, the psychology and the spirituality of this principle involved, is no modern concept or contraption of our modern society. No, this is Old Testament times, thousands of years ago, and yet the principle embedded in this story is entirely relevant to our contemporary existence, more so during this pandemic situation. Now hear this. There is a link between our thoughts, our sight, and our faith. Now it would indeed be disastrous for Jacob in this story, but for the fact that this man understood the link between thoughts and faith, between his thinking and his faith. Now in the realm of the natural, it would appear that Jacob had a poor deal. If you know the story, he asked for the blemished animals to be his reward to look after the entire flock for his father-in-law. And before he knew it, on that very day, the father-in-law spirited away every single one of those blemished animals. Everything that he was supposed to work for was gone. So he was left with nothing and still had to look after all the good ones for his dear father-in-law, who rightly should be called the father-outlaw. Now I like to think that Jacob took such a poor deal because in his mind, he knew how to change the situation through his understanding of the link between his thoughts and the manner in which he sees things and his faith. What you think, what you see, that you become. What the animals thought and saw, that they too became. These clear, unspotted animals of Laban, the father-in-law of Jacob, these animals were made to think and see the beauty of the speckled, the spotted, and the striped. Jacob made these clean, clear, prized animals picture the blemish, patterns, day after day. He built a trough for them. He built the environment for them. So that's what they were thinking and seeing every day in, day out, at drinking times and at mating times. And in that environment, it conditioned their mindset. It conditioned the reality. So freckled offsprings resulted. Images give birth to reality. The sight of the eyes and the minds give birth to something different to the surrounding reality. Clean animals giving birth to speckled ones. Now, can you foresee what God has in store for you in the current situation? And indeed, post-pandemic. If you cannot think it, if you cannot see it, you'll never get. You and I, we seriously need to start putting different thoughts into our heads, pictures and images before our eyes. Because these things are linked. You and I can only begin to enjoy the reality of God, the intervening invisible hand of God, the miraculous in our lives, if we start to think and see and call the things that are not as though they were. This is Romans chapter 4 verse 17. Now let me now bring you to the New Testament. What I was talking was the Old Testament. Now let's fast forward to the New Testament. Mark chapter 6 verse 1 to 5 is an interesting passage on this principle. This was Jesus returning back to his hometown. And when the Sabbath came, the scripture tells us, he began to teach in the synagogue there. And many who heard him were amazed. Why did this man get these things? They asked. What's this wisdom that has been given to him? What are these remarkable miracles he is performing? Isn't this the carpenter? Isn't this Mary's son, the brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Aren't his sisters here with us? And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor, except in his own town And in verse 5, the passage tells us that Jesus could not do any miracles except lay his hand on a few sick people and heal them. Now, interesting. We hear here, right, that Jesus was unable to do many miracles in his hometown. This is Jesus, the Son of God, who was performing miracles everywhere. Now, was the Son of God without authority? Was the Son of God without compassion for his hometown? Was the divinity or his divinity somehow diminished or limited because he was in a familiar environment? He could not do many miracles because the people kept thinking and seeing him not as the Son of God, but as the carpenter's son, as the carpenter himself. These people, good people in his hometown, they thought of him and they saw him not as the Son of God, but the Son of Mary. They thought of him and saw him like his earthly siblings. And that's what they got. They simply obtained what they thought and observed. So let me finish by asking you, how are you perceiving circumstances and events in your life right now? Are you then watching wrong pictures and images in life? Remember, what you think, see, that you become. So for example, if you are thinking and seeing all the negative scenarios in your current challenges, is it any wonder why you are fearful? You are resigned? And you wonder why God seems like a million miles away? Now Jacob in the story, he changed the way the animals think and see things around them. The result was awesome. He became a very rich man. Scripture was very explicit, telling us that by the time his father-in-law Laban realized what was happening, Jacob grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and male and female servants and camels and donkeys. That was found in verse 43 of the same chapter. In our modern language, Jacob became a high achiever, a very successful man. Change the way you think and see things. Change the way you visualize things. Change the way you perceive events that surround you. Change your perspective. Because if you do, you will see dramatic changes. You will see new directions. You will see the reality of God in your life. You will see the miraculous, the supernatural, financial breakthrough, bondages and stronghold torn down and broken habits destroyed. And you will start calling the things that are not as though they were. Now Paul, in writing to the Ephesians in chapter 3 verse 20, a scripture verse many of you could well memorize. And he said, now to God, who is able to do immeasurably, in other words, exceedingly, abundantly, above more than all we ever ask or imagine, according to the power, the faith that is at work within us. Now the Greek lexicon, or the original language for the word imagine here, that root word implies thoughts and understanding. So in other words, how God provides for us in the superlative manner, in the most expressive manner, in the abundance of what he can do for us, has everything to do with our minds and our perspectives. In our current situation, some of us, if not many of us, need to change our thinking and replace pictures and images in our minds. We need to swap the limitation of our current existence for the unlimited possibilities of the future. We are only as good as our thinking and our seeing allows us. And no wonder scripture tells us, as a man thinketh, so is he. The Lord bless you.